We're diving into a truly layered subject today, the name Jesus. Not just a word we use every day, but a name carrying centuries of meaning.
Yeah, and it's so interesting how that name, originally Yeshua, evolved and took on so many layers.
Exactly. The name starts with its Hebrew Aramaic roots. Yeshua, meaning Yahweh is salvation, or Yahweh saves. And that was, well, a pretty straightforward declaration in its original context.
Definitely. And it's fascinating to note that back in the Second Temple period, it was a common name, like how we might think of Joshua today.
Right. It was almost like a cultural standard even then, but later on, it wasn't just a common label. It transformed into a full-on mission statement.
Yeah, for sure. And you see that stand out in the Gospel of Matthew. An angel tells Joseph to name the child Jesus because he will save his people from their sins. It's like the very name is woven into his destiny.
Exactly. It's like the name itself is a prophecy written into his identity.
Right. And that brings up an intriguing point. Do you think the gospel writers were more focused on symbolic storytelling than on a strict biographical account of who he was?
Absolutely. Many scholars, like Raymond Brown, have argued that the infancy narratives are less about history and more about theological messaging. They create a bridge between the Hebrew scriptures and the new narrative of salvation.
It's almost as if the name is an invitation, a call to see Jesus as both a historical figure and a symbol of divine promise.
Yeah, and here's where it gets even more layered. You've got scholars like Bart Ehrman suggesting that Jesus was probably really called Yeshua, originally by his immediate circle, and then later the name transformed into Iēsous in Greek as the message spread to the wider Greco-Roman world.
And that transformation wasn't just a linguistic shift. It was part of adapting the narrative to fit different cultural contexts.
Exactly. It's like the name took on a dual role. On one hand, it remained a common personal name. On the other, it acquired this divine or even mythical heft over time.
Right, and then you have scholars like Robert Price and Richard Carrier pushing the idea even further, questioning whether the name was used as more of a symbolic title than as a reference to a strict historical person from Nazareth.
Yes, precisely. It opens up the debate. Was Jesus simply a historical rabbi with a common name? Or did his followers imbue that name with a kind of celestial gravitas?
Yeah, that's a big question. And on that note, the early Christian texts, particularly Paul's letters, are interesting because Paul uses Iēsous Christos without ever mentioning Yeshua. Is that an indication that he too saw the name as more than just identity, but more of a title?
Possibly, yeah. Paul's writings, dating from around 50 to 60 CE, focus largely on the salvific meaning behind the name, rather than on the earthly biography. It's almost as if the name carried its own authority.
Yet, on the flip side, isn't it a bit puzzling that these early texts don't delve into the human side of Yeshua? It makes you wonder if the focus was, from the start, on a symbolic role rather than a historical account.
That's a fair challenge. It's like the narrative deliberately chooses to elevate the name into something almost mythic. But maybe that was exactly the point, to inspire faith and alignment with prophecy.
Right. And speaking of prophecy, the cultural shift from Yeshua to Iēsous clearly reflects a transition in the audience. The texts were, after all, being composed for a Greek-speaking world that had its own cultural touchstones and religious expectations.
Exactly. It's like a cultural remix, taking a familiar tune from Hebrew origins and remixing it for a wholly different audience.
I love that analogy. But here's something to consider. If the name was reshaped so heavily by different cultural influences, can we ever pinpoint its true meaning?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It seems the name, by its very evolution, embodies a dynamic tension between historical fact and theological storytelling.
Right. And then there are even more esoteric angles. Hugh Schonfield, for example, put forth this idea that the name, along with other titles of Jesus, was used, almost engineered, to fit the messianic mold of Jewish expectations.
Yeah, the mystical and Gnostic interpretations really add another stratum. In some traditions, Jesus becomes less about the earthly man and more like a cipher for divine wisdom or logos.
Exactly. And it raises the point that for some, the name transcends historical reference to stand as an emblem of deeper spiritual truths.
True, it's almost like every generation remixes the name in its own context. What started as an everyday name ends up being a profound symbol with mythic resonance.
Yeah, but isn't that a bit problematic? If the name's meaning keeps shifting, then how do we anchor our understanding of it today?
That's a challenging critique. On one hand, the flexible evolution of the name speaks to its rich, layered history. On the other, it really does complicate modern interpretations.
Right. It's like trying to nail jelly to a wall. Every era pulls a little different story out of it.
Exactly, and that's what makes it so fascinating. The name Jesus is at once a concrete identifier and an abstract symbol of salvation and
Absolutely.
hope.
And it's evident that over time, every retelling added new layers, whether it's through historical detail, theological passion, or mystical allegory.
Yes, and when you look at those early references, Paul's letters versus the later gospel narratives, you can see that shift. Paul treats the name more as an accepted spiritual title, while the Gospels provide backstories that ground it, even if they're steeped in symbolic meaning.
Yep. That kind of divergence really underscores the debate. Some might argue that focusing too much on the symbolic detracts from the historical person, while others see history itself as an evolving narrative.
Right, and honestly, both sides have merit. It's like you're looking at the same sculpture from different angles. Each view reveals a different facet of meaning.
And speaking of facets, don't you find it intriguing that even today the name Jesus continues to spark such vibrant discussion across different fields? History, theology, literature.
Absolutely. It's one of those topics that keeps the conversation alive no matter how many years pass. Every discussion, every reinterpretation adds another chapter to a very long story.
Right. It really is a timeless puzzle, a name that holds the keys to both our past and our ongoing quest for meaning.
Exactly, and that's the beauty of exploring something so multifaceted. Whether you see Jesus as a historical figure, a divine savior, or even as a mythical symbol, the name invites us to ask deeper questions about who we are and what we believe.
And despite the debates and respectful disagreements among scholars, the discussion itself lights a fire under our exploration of history and faith.
Totally. It's like every perspective, be it the historical, theological, or mystical, adds richness to the overall tapestry of meaning behind the name Jesus.
Yeah, that's true. Well, thanks for this energetic dive into such a deep topic. It really gets you thinking about how one simple name can carry so many lives and legacies over time.
Absolutely. So let's keep questioning and exploring these layers. There's always more to discover, and every perspective deepens our understanding.
Right. Until next time, keep seeking those deeper meanings and enjoying the journey of discovery.